Captain Diane Richardson was bone-tired as she walked through the sliding doors of Denver International Airport. She'd been traveling for nearly 20 hours, coming back from somewhere she couldn't talk about, doing work she couldn't discuss. That's how it went when you worked in military intelligence. 15 years she'd been doing this, and the secrecy never got easier. She wore simple clothes, jeans, a black t-shirt, and sneakers. Her dark green duffel bag hung from her shoulder, packed with the few personal items she'd taken overseas. No uniform today. She just wanted to get through security, catch her connecting flight to North Carolina and sleep in her own bed. Maybe see her mom, eat some real home cooking, and forget about the last 3 months for a while. The airport was busy for a Tuesday morning. Business travelers rushed past with their rolling suitcases. Families herded sleepy children toward the ticket counters. Diane joined the security line, setting her bag down and pulling out her ID. Just another traveler trying to get home. That's when she noticed the TSA agent staring at her. Not the normal once-over they give everyone. This was different. The agent, a middle-aged woman with thin lips, leaned over and whispered something to her colleague. The second agent looked up, spotted Diane, and immediately reached for his radio. Diane felt a familiar tightness in her chest. She'd felt it before, too many times to count. That moment when you realize someone's seeing your skin color before they see you, before they see the person who serves their country, who's earned every stripe and star through sweat and sacrifice. She told herself to stay calm. Probably nothing. Maybe they were just being cautious. The line moved forward and she stepped up to the conveyor belt, placing her bag in a bin. The TSA agent, the woman who'd been staring, held up her hand. "Ma'am, step aside, please." Diane did. "Is there a problem?" "Just step aside." The woman's voice was clipped, cold. 2 more security officers appeared. Both men, both with their hands resting on their belts in that way that made Diane's military instincts kick in. She'd been in enough tense situations to know when things were about to go sideways. "Can you tell me what this is about?" Diane kept her voice level, professional. "We need to ask you some questions." "Okay, but about what?" The officers didn't answer. One of them spoke into his radio. Diane heard fragments. Matching description, Terminal B. Then airport police showed up. 2 officers at first, then 2 more. People in line were starting to stare now, pulling out their phones. Diane could feel dozens of eyes on her, judging, assuming. Her face grew hot, but she kept her expression neutral. One of the police officers, a tall man with gray at his temples, stepped forward. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us. I'd like to know what this is about first. I have a flight to catch. You can either come voluntarily or we'll escort you." Diane's military training screamed at her to comply, to not escalate. But another part of her, the part that had fought too hard for too long, wanted to demand answers. She was a United States Army captain. She'd led missions in places these officers couldn't find on a map. She'd earned the right to be treated with basic respect. "I'm happy to cooperate, but I'm asking a simple question. What's this about?" That's when everything went wrong. The gray-haired officer's hand moved to his weapon. "Get on the ground, now!" Diane's heart hammered in her chest. "What?" "I haven't done anything. On the ground." Another officer drew his gun, pointing it directly at her. Time seemed to slow down. Diane saw the weapons pointed at her chest, saw the fear in some passengers' eyes, the curiosity in others, heard someone gasp, heard a child ask, "Mommy, why do they have guns?" She knew exactly what would happen if she hesitated. She'd seen the news. She knew the statistics. Being right didn't matter if you were dead. Diane lowered herself to her knees, then to the ground, the cold airport floor pressing against her cheek. Her arms were yanked behind her back, metal handcuffs biting into her wrists. The bite of the cuffs, the pressure of a knee on her back. The humiliation of being face down in front of hundreds of strangers. It all crashed over her like a wave. "You're making a mistake," she said, her voice muffled against the floor. "I'm a U.S. Army captain. My ID is in my bag. Save it," one officer growled. They hauled her to her feet. The handcuffs were too tight, already cutting off circulation. Diane could feel her fingers starting to tingle. People were definitely recording now. She could see phones held high, capturing every moment of her humiliation. As they marched her through the terminal, Diane kept her head up. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her broken. She'd survived worse than this. Hostile territory, enemy fire, loss of soldiers under her command. This was just a different kind of battle, but it hurt differently. This was supposed to be home. These were supposed to be her people. She'd spent 15 years protecting them, and now they treated her like a criminal. They took her to a small, windowless room somewhere in the depths of the airport. Gray walls, a metal table, 2 chairs, like something out of a bad cop show. They left the handcuffs on, even though she was locked in with nowhere to go. Diane sat down carefully, trying to ease the pressure on her wrists. She counted her breaths, a technique she'd taught young soldiers dealing with combat stress. In for 4 counts, hold for 4, out for 4. Stay calm, stay focused. The door opened. 2 officers walked in, the gray-haired one who'd drawn his weapon and a younger guy with a buzz cut who looked like he might have been military himself once. They sat across from her, pulling out notepads like this was routine. "You want to tell us why you ran?" Gray hair asked. Diane stared at him. "I didn't run. I didn't even move. I asked a question. You matched a description of a suspect. Theft at the airport. What suspect? I just got off an international flight. I've been overseas for 3 months. That's convenient." Diane felt anger rising in her throat, hot and bitter. She swallowed it down. "Check my credentials. I'm Captain Diane Richardson, United States Army. My military ID is in my duffel bag along with my deployment papers." Buzzcut shifted uncomfortably. "We'll get to that. Get to it now. You've got the wrong person, and every minute you keep me here, you're making this worse for yourselves." "Are you threatening us?" Gray hair leaned forward. "I'm stating facts. I'm a decorated military officer. I've done nothing wrong. And you've handcuffed me, pointed weapons at me, and paraded me through an airport like a criminal. When you figure out your mistake, and you will, this becomes a very different conversation." The officers exchanged glances. Diane could see doubt creeping into Buzzcut's eyes. Gray hair, though, looked stubborn. The kind of man who'd double down rather than admit error. "We're just doing our jobs," he said. "So am I. Or at least I was, until about an hour ago when I was trying to get home after serving my country." Diane's phone was buzzing in her confiscated bag. She could hear it, a persistent vibration against the table where they'd dumped her belongings. Someone was trying to reach her. Probably her commanding officer, wondering why she hadn't checked in. Or her mother, excited for her to be home. She thought about what her mom would think if she saw this. Her daughter, her pride and joy, the first in their family to become an officer, face down on an airport floor. The thought made her throat tight. 2 hours passed. 2 hours of sitting in handcuffs while the officers took their time, made their calls, filled out their forms. 2 hours of being treated like she was nothing. Finally, Gray hair stood up and grabbed Diane's duffel bag. He unzipped it roughly, dumping the contents onto the metal table. Clean uniforms, carefully folded, toiletries, a paperback novel she'd been reading, a framed photo of her mom, and then her military ID. He picked it up, squinting at it under the fluorescent lights. His face went pale. Buzzcut leaned over to look, and Diane watched as the color drained from his face too. "Oh no," Buzzcut whispered. Gray hair flipped through more papers, her deployment orders, letters of commendation, a Bronze Star certificate, her entire career laid out on that table, proof of everything she'd said. "Get these cuffs off her," Gray hair said quietly. "Now you want to take them off?" Diane's voice was steel. "After 2 hours?" Buzzcut fumbled with his keys, hands shaking as he unlocked the handcuffs. The relief was immediate, but so was the pain. Diane's wrists were raw, red marks circling them like bracelets. She rubbed them slowly, deliberately, making sure both officers saw exactly what their handcuffs had done. "Captain Richardson, we—" Gray hair cleared his throat. "There's been a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding." Diane let the words hang in the air. "Is that what we're calling this? We received a report of a suspect. A woman, 30s, wearing casual clothes. Let me guess. A black woman?" The silence in the room was deafening. Diane stood up, drawing herself to her full height. She wasn't a tall woman, but right now she felt 10 feet tall. "Did your suspect description include hair color? Eye color? Distinguishing marks? Or was it just black woman in jeans?" "Captain, if you'd just—" "No." Diane cut him off. "You don't get to captain me now. 2 hours ago I was a suspect. 2 hours ago you pointed guns at me. What changed? All right. You finally did your job and checked my ID." Buzzcut looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. "We're sorry. We really are. I want to speak to your supervisor, now. That's not—" "Now." Diane's command voice came out, the one she used when leading soldiers. The one that didn't accept arguments. Gray hair left the room. Diane could hear him on his radio in the hallway, his voice urgent. Buzzcut stayed, shifting his weight from foot to foot, unable to meet her eyes. "Were you military?" Diane asked him. He looked up, surprised. "Yes, ma'am. Marine Corps, 4 years. Then you know better. You know what the uniform means, what service means." "I do, ma'am, He trailed off. What could he say? There was no good excuse, and they both knew it. Diane's phone buzzed again. This time, Buzzcut pushed it across the table to her. She picked it up and her stomach dropped. 43 missed calls, dozens of text messages. And when she opened her social media, her face was everywhere. Someone had posted the video of her arrest. Not just posted it, it had gone viral. Millions of views already. She watched herself on the screen. Face down on the airport floor, guns pointed at her. Read the comments flooding in. "That's Captain Diane Richardson. She's a decorated war hero. This is disgusting. She serves our country and this is how we treat her?" Racial profiling, plain and simple. Her commanding officer, General Patricia Hollis, had called 7 times. So had her mom, her sister, her best friend from basic training. The news had spread through the military community like wildfire. The door burst open. A man in a police chief's uniform rushed in, followed by gray hair and 2 other people in suits. The chief's face was red, his forehead beaded with sweat. "Captain Richardson, I'm Chief Thomas Warren. I cannot express how deeply sorry. You pointed guns at me." Diane's voice was quiet, but it cut through his apology like a knife. "In an airport full of people. You handcuffed me. You left me in this room for 2 hours. And now you're sorry? It was a terrible mistake. A misidentification. We've already apprehended the actual suspect and..." "Who was the suspect?" Chief Warren hesitated. "I don't think who was the suspect." One of the suits, a woman with sharp eyes, spoke up. A Caucasian woman, mid-20s, blonde hair. She was caught shoplifting from one of the duty-free stores. Diane felt something cold settle in her chest. "So let me understand this. Your suspect was a young white woman with blonde hair, and you arrested me. A black woman who's at least 10 years older. What exactly did we have in common?" Nobody answered. They didn't have to. "The suspect was wearing jeans," Gray hair said weakly. "Half the people in this airport are wearing jeans." Chief Warren held up his hands. "Captain, I understand you're upset." "Upset?" Diane laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Upset is when someone cuts you off in traffic. This isn't upset. This is fury. This is humiliation. This is me, a 15-year Army veteran, being treated like a criminal in my own country. The country I serve. The country I've bled for." She rolled up her sleeve, revealing a scar on her forearm. "See this? Shrapnel. Afghanistan, 2019. I got this protecting Americans. And today Americans pointed guns at me in an airport." The room was silent. Even gray hair couldn't look at her now. "We'll make this right," Chief Warren said. "Whatever you need. What I need is to not have this happen to anyone else. But we both know it will. Because this wasn't about me matching a description. This was about me being black in an airport and that being enough." Diane's phone rang. "General Hollis," she answered, stepping away from the group. "Diane? Thank God, are you okay?" "I'm fine, ma'am." "You're not fine." "I saw the video. I'm at Peterson Air Force Base. I'll be there in 90 minutes with our legal team. Don't sign anything. Don't agree to anything. Don't even accept their apologies until we get there." "Yes, ma'am." "Diane." The general's voice softened. "I'm proud of you. How you handled yourself. How you kept your composure. But you don't have to be composed anymore. You have every right to be angry." Diane felt tears prick her eyes for the first time. "Thank you, ma'am." She hung up and turned back to the group. "My commanding officer is on her way. With lawyers. I suggest you start getting your story straight because mine is very simple. I did nothing wrong." Chief Warren nodded, looking defeated. "We'll cooperate fully with any investigation. You'd better. Because this video?" Diane held up her phone. 7 million views and counting. "This isn't going away." She started gathering her belongings, folding her uniforms back into her bag. Her hands were steady now, her military training taking over. Process the emotions later. Right now, focus on the mission. "Where are you going?" one of the suits asked. "To catch my flight. I've been trying to get home for 20 hours. You've delayed me long enough. We can arrange for you to be escorted through security," Chief Warren offered. Diane gave him a look that could melt steel. "You think I want your escorts?" You think I want more of your officers following me through this airport? I'll take my chances with regular security, thanks. She shouldered her bag and walked to the door. Then she paused and turned back. Detective, she looked at Gray Hair's name tag. Detective Bradley, when you go home tonight, I want you to think about something. You drew your weapon on an unarmed woman who'd done nothing wrong. You could have asked for my ID. You could have talked to me like a human being. But you saw a black woman and assumed criminal. What if your training had been different? What if your first instinct had been to see me as a person? Bradley opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Officer Chen. She looked at Buzzcut. You were a Marine. You know about honor, about treating people with dignity. You know the difference between a threat and a tired soldier trying to get home. Think about that. She walked out, her head high, her shoulders back. Military bearing. They could take a lot from her, but they couldn't take that. The hallway seemed to stretch forever. Airport workers and passengers stared as she passed. Some looked away quickly. Others nodded at her with respect. One older man wearing a Vietnam veteran's cap saluted. Diane returned it crisply. At the security checkpoint, a different TSA agent, a young black man, waved her through. We saw what happened, ma'am. We're sorry. That ain't right. Thank you, Diane said softly. She made it through security without incident this time. Her gate was at the far end of the terminal. She walked past the shops, past the restaurants, past the place where she'd been arrested. A couple of travelers recognized her from the video. One woman approached tentatively. Are you the captain? From the video? Diane nodded. I'm so sorry that happened to you. Thank you for your service, really. I appreciate that. More people came up. Some wanted to express support. Some wanted to take photos with her. Diane was patient with all of them, but inside she felt exhausted. She just wanted to go home. By the time Diane reached her gate, General Hollis had arrived at the airport with 2 military lawyers and a media liaison. The general was a formidable woman in her late 50s, with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that could read a situation in seconds. She'd been Diane's mentor for years, one of the few people who truly understood what it meant to be a black woman climbing the ranks in the military. They met in a private airport lounge that the airline had hastily arranged. As soon as the door closed, General Hollis pulled Diane into a hug. You shouldn't have had to go through that. Diane's carefully maintained composure finally cracked. She didn't cry. Years of military discipline wouldn't allow that, but her voice shook. I did everything right, ma'am. I stayed calm. I complied. And they still treated me like I was nothing. I know, but you're not nothing. You're one of the finest officers I've ever served with, and what happened today is unacceptable. The lawyers, Captain Jessica Torres and Major David Kim, pulled out laptops and recording equipment. They needed Diane's full account while everything was fresh. For the next hour, Diane walked them through every detail. The stairs, the drawn weapons, the handcuffs, the interrogation. She spoke in the clear, precise language of military reports, but the emotion underneath was like a current. They never checked the actual suspect description, Major Kim said, shaking his head. The real suspect was caught an hour before they arrested you. What? Diane sat up straight. They already had someone in custody? Yes, a shoplifter at Terminal C, Caucasian female, 24 years old, blonde hair. Detective Bradley received an initial radio call about the suspect, but apparently never followed up or checked the bulletin that was sent out with the actual photo and description. Captain, Torres pulled up something on her laptop. Look at this. Here's the official bulletin that went out to all airport security. She turned the screen. The suspect in the photo looked nothing like Diane, nothing, so he heard female suspect and saw me. Diane's voice was flat. It appears that way, General. Hollis stood and walked to the window overlooking the tarmac. This isn't just about one bad cop or one mistake. This is systemic, and it's time we address it, ma'am, Diane asked. The general turned back. Your story is everywhere, Diane. CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, every major outlet. Social media is on fire. The Army's Public Affairs Office has been getting calls all day. The Secretary of Defense wants a briefing. This has become something much bigger than one incident. The media liaison, a civilian named Robert Chen, spoke up. Captain Richardson, every news organization in the country wants to interview you. We need to be strategic about this. I don't want to be a story, Diane said. I just want to go home. I understand, Robert said gently. But you're a story now, whether you want to be or not. The question is whether you control the narrative or let others control it for you. General Hollis sat down next to Diane. He's right. And more importantly, you have a platform now to make real change. How many other service members have faced this kind of discrimination? How many civilians? You can speak for them. Diane rubbed her wrists, which were still red and sore. I'm not a civil rights activist. I'm a soldier. Soldiers fight for what's right. That's what you've been doing your whole career. This is just a different battlefield. Over the next few hours, they worked out a strategy. Diane would give one major press conference before leaving the airport. She'd speak as both a military officer and as a black woman who'd experienced racial profiling. She'd be honest about what happened but maintain dignity and professionalism. Meanwhile, outside the private lounge, the airport was in crisis mode. Chief Warren had set up a command center where he was coordinating with city officials, the mayor's office, and his own internal affairs division. He knew his career was probably over, but more than that, he knew his department had committed a serious civil rights violation. His phone wouldn't stop ringing. Civil rights organizations were demanding investigations. The ACLU was drafting complaints. The mayor wanted answers. And Detective Bradley and Officer Chen were sitting in his office, looking like they wished the floor would swallow them whole. Tell me exactly what happened, Warren demanded for the third time. Bradley went through it again. We got a call about a shoplifter, female, wearing jeans and a dark shirt. I saw her matching the basic description. Basic description? A woman in jeans? That's half the airport. I made a judgment call. You made an assumption. There's a difference. Warren pulled up the video on his computer, the one now viewed by millions. You drew your weapon on an unarmed, non-threatening woman who identified herself as military and asked simple questions. You put a knee on her back. You handcuffed her so tight she has marks. And you held her for 2 hours without even checking her ID properly. Officer Chen spoke up quietly. Chief, I knew something was wrong. I could feel it. But I went along. That's not good enough. You were a Marine. You know about following lawful orders and questioning unlawful ones. This was unlawful. Bradley's face reddened. We were trying to keep the airport safe. From what? A decorated Army captain with a duffel bag full of uniforms? Warren slammed his hand on the desk. I've looked into your records, Bradley. 3 complaints of racial profiling in the last 2 years. All swept under the rug, marked as no grounds for discipline. Well, this one won't be swept anywhere. Back in the lounge, Diane was being prepared for the press conference. A makeup artist had been brought in to help with the harsh TV lighting. Diane sat still while the woman worked, her mind far away. General Hollis sat across from her. You ready for this? Do I have a choice? You always have a choice, Captain. If you want to skip this, get on your plane and go home. I'll support that decision. But I think you know what needs to be done. Diane met her eyes. When I joined the Army, I took an oath to defend the Constitution. That includes defending the rights it guarantees. The right to be treated fairly under the law. The right to dignity. That's what I thought you'd say. The press conference was set up in one of the airport's larger conference rooms. By the time Diane walked in wearing her dress uniform with her medals gleaming on her chest, the room was packed. Cameras lined the back wall. Reporters filled every seat. The clicking of camera shutters sounded like rain. Diane stood at the podium, her hands resting lightly on either side. She'd given briefings before, had spoken to crowds of soldiers, had presented intelligence findings to generals. But this felt different. This was personal. Good afternoon. My name is Captain Diane Richardson. I'm a 15-year veteran of the United States Army, currently assigned to military intelligence operations. This morning I returned from a deployment overseas. I came home expecting to be reunited with my family. Instead, I was arrested, had guns pointed at me, was handcuffed, and was detained for 2 hours in an airport interrogation room. The room was silent except for the cameras. I want to be clear about something. I'm not unique. What happened to me happens to Black Americans every day. The only difference is that I'm wearing this uniform. I have rank and status that most people don't have. I have resources and support that most people don't have. And yet none of that protected me from being seen as a threat simply because of the color of my skin. She paused, letting that sink in. I served in Afghanistan. I led missions in hostile territory. I've made life and death decisions under enemy fire. I've earned commendations for valor and leadership. But this morning, in an American airport, I was treated like a criminal. Not because of anything I did, Not because I matched an actual suspect description. The real suspect, by the way, was a young white woman who looks nothing like me. I was targeted because a police officer made assumptions based on race. A reporter raised her hand. "Captain, do you plan to sue?" "That's being discussed with legal counsel. But honestly, a lawsuit isn't my primary concern. My concern is systemic change. How many other service members have experienced this? How many civilians who don't have my platform or resources? How many people's lives have been disrupted, traumatized, or even ended because of racial profiling?" Another reporter stood. "What do you want to see happen?" "I want to see comprehensive reform in how law enforcement approaches communities of color. I want to see real training, not just checkbox compliance. I want accountability when officers violate civil rights. And I want people to understand that you can wear a uniform, serve your country, earn the highest honors, and still be treated as less than human because of your skin color." The questions kept coming. Diane answered each one with the same measured professionalism she brought to military briefings. But underneath, the emotion was there. 15 years of microaggressions, of being questioned where white officers weren't, of having to prove herself over and over again. General Hollis watched from the side of the room with pride. This was leadership. This was courage, not the kind displayed on a battlefield with weapons, but the kind that spoke truth to power, that refused to be silenced or diminished. After 30 minutes, Robert Chen stepped forward to end the press conference. As Diane stepped away from the podium, a black reporter in the front row stood up. "Captain Richardson, one more question if I may. What would you say to young black Americans who see this video and wonder if serving their country is worth it?" Diane stopped and turned back. The question hit her in the chest. She thought about all the young soldiers she'd mentored over the years. The ones who looked like her, who fought the same battles she did. Both overseas and at home, I'd say this. Service is worth it because the ideals we fight for are worth it. Freedom, justice, equality, these aren't just words. They're promises. And yes, America hasn't always kept those promises, especially to black Americans. But that doesn't mean we stop fighting for them. That doesn't mean we surrender the uniform or the right to serve. It means we fight harder. We demand better. We make the military and this country live up to its highest ideals. Because that's what patriots do. The room erupted in applause. The video of Diane's press conference was shared even more widely than the arrest footage. Within hours, it had tens of millions of views across every platform. Her words, calm, powerful, unflinching, resonated with people from all walks of life. Veterans shared it in military groups. Civil rights organizations made it required viewing. Teachers showed it in classrooms. Parents talked about it at dinner tables. But it wasn't just praise. The backlash came too, swift and ugly. Anonymous accounts flooded her social media with hateful messages. She was called divisive, angry, a troublemaker. People who'd never worn a uniform questioned her service. Some claimed she was exaggerating, that it couldn't have been as bad as she said despite the video evidence. Others said she should have been more respectful to the officers, more compliant, more grateful they didn't shoot her. Diane sat in her hotel room that night. She'd missed her flight home and the airline had put her up, scrolling through the messages. General Hollis had told her not to look, but she couldn't help it. She needed to see what she was up against. Her phone rang. Her mother. "Baby, I've been trying to reach you all day." "I know, Mama, I'm sorry. It's been crazy. I saw what happened. I saw those men put guns on you." Her mother's voice broke. "My baby on the ground like that." I couldn't breathe watching it. "I'm okay, Mama. You're not okay. Don't lie to me. I raised you, remember?" "I know when you're hurting." Diane felt her throat tighten. "I keep thinking, what if I'd done something different? What if I'd moved wrong? Or they'd thought I was reaching for something? I could be dead right now, Mama, over nothing. But you're not. You're here. And you handled it exactly right. You kept your head. You stayed calm. You did what you had to do to survive." Her mother paused. "Just like I taught you." Diane remembered all the conversations growing up. Her mother sitting her down, explaining how to interact with police. "Keep your hands visible. Don't make sudden movements. Be respectful even when they're not." It was a talk every black parent had with their kids. A survival guide passed down through generations. "It shouldn't be like this," Diane whispered. "No, it shouldn't. But you're doing something about it now. You're making noise, making people pay attention. That's brave, baby. That's really brave. They talked for another hour about small things and big things until Diane felt steady again. After hanging up, she opened her laptop. The lawyers had sent over preliminary reports on the airport police department. What she read made her blood boil. Detective Bradley had a history, not just the 3 complaints General Hollis mentioned, but a pattern going back years. Excessive force complaints, accusations of racial profiling, all documented, all investigated, all resulting in nothing more than retraining and notes in his file. Officer Chen was cleaner, but he'd been partnered with Bradley for 2 years. How many incidents had he witnessed and said nothing? The real suspect, she learned, had been caught within an hour of her theft. The bulletin with her photo and description had been sent to all airport security at that time. Bradley would have received it on his radio and his mobile device. He'd simply never checked. He'd seen Diane, made his assumption, and acted. But the deeper she dug, the more Diane realized this wasn't just about 2 bad officers. The airport police department's training materials were outdated. Their policies on stops and searches were vague. Their bias training was a single PowerPoint presentation given once during orientation. There was no meaningful oversight, no real accountability structure. This was the systemic problem General Hollis had talked about. And fixing it would require more than punishing Bradley and Chen. It would require overhauling the entire system. The next morning, Diane woke to news that shocked her. Detective Bradley and Officer Chen had been placed on administrative leave, pending a full investigation. The city had announced an independent review of the airport police department. The mayor was calling for reform, and the NAACP had filed a federal civil rights complaint on Diane's behalf. Things were moving fast. Too fast, maybe. Robert Chen called with a schedule that made Diane's head spin. Morning shows wanted interviews. Cable news requested her for prime time. A podcast about racial justice wanted her story. A major publishing house reached out about a book deal. "This is overwhelming," Diane told General Hollis during a video call. "It is, but you don't have to do it all. Choose the platforms that matter. Tell your story on your terms. And remember, you're still on active duty. You still answer to the Army first." What's the Army's position on all this? Officially, the Army supports you completely. The Secretary of Defense put out a statement condemning racial profiling and affirming your service. Unofficially, some folks are nervous. They don't like controversy. But the smart ones know this is bigger than one incident. They know the military has its own issues with racial discrimination, and maybe this spotlight will help address them too. Diane thought about that. She'd experienced racism in the military, of course. The comments about her getting promoted because of diversity initiatives, never mind her combat record. The assumptions that she was support staff, not a captain. The times her authority was questioned by subordinates who'd never question a white male officer. Maybe this was an opportunity to address all of it. She agreed to 3 major interviews: a morning show, a primetime news segment, and a podcast that focused on military issues. In each one, she told her story clearly and honestly. She didn't exaggerate or diminish what happened. She let the facts speak for themselves. But she also talked about the bigger picture, about how Black service members faced higher rates of military discipline for the same infractions as white service members, about how racial disparities existed at every level of the armed forces, about how you could be trusted to defend your country but still be treated as a threat in your own homeland. The response was electric. Veterans, especially Black veterans, shared their own stories. White veterans expressed shock and support, many admitting they'd never understood the different reality their Black brothers and sisters faced. Active duty service members, bound by regulations about public statements, found ways to express solidarity. But the most powerful responses came from civilians. Teachers who showed her interviews to students, parents who used her story to talk to their kids about racism, people who'd never thought much about racial profiling suddenly couldn't ignore it. Meanwhile, the investigation into the airport police department accelerated. An independent firm was brought in to review practices and policies. They interviewed staff, reviewed arrest records, and analyzed complaint files. What they found was damning. Black and Latino travelers were 3 times more likely to be stopped, questioned, or searched than white travelers, even though contraband was found at equal or lower rates. Use of force incidents disproportionately involved people of color, and complaints about racial profiling were routinely dismissed without proper investigation. The firm's preliminary report leaked to the press. The headlines were brutal, systemic. Racism found in airport police department independent. Review confirms pattern of racial profiling. Captain Richardson's case part of larger problem. Chief Warren resigned before the final report was even finished. He gave a brief statement accepting responsibility and apologizing to the community, but by then no one was listening. His reputation was destroyed, his career over. Detective Bradley and Officer Chen were fired. The police union fought it, claiming procedural violations in the termination process, but public sentiment was so strongly against them that the fight was largely symbolic. The criminal civil rights investigation by federal authorities continued. For Diane, watching the dominoes fall was strange. She just wanted to go home. She just wanted to be treated with basic respect. Now she was at the center of a national conversation about race, policing, and justice. 3 weeks after the incident, Diane was called to testify before a congressional committee examining racial profiling in airports and public spaces. She sat at a table facing rows of representatives, cameras broadcasting her testimony live. Some representatives were supportive, thanking her for her service and praising her courage. Others were defensive, suggesting she was overreacting or making the incident about race when it was just a simple mistake. Diane remained calm through it all. When a particularly hostile representative suggested she should have been more understanding of the officer's difficult job, she leaned forward. "Congressman, I understand difficult jobs. I've led soldiers in combat. I've made split-second decisions where lives hung in the balance. I know about stress and danger and the weight of responsibility, but that doesn't excuse what happened to me. Those officers had time. They had resources. They had all the information they needed to know I wasn't their suspect. They chose not to use it because they'd already decided who I was based on my appearance." The room fell silent. "And if we can't expect police, officers in a civilian airport, to check basic facts before drawing weapons, how can we trust them in any situation? How can communities of color feel safe when this level of assumption and bias is considered acceptable?" The clip went viral, shared millions of times. Diane's testimony became required viewing in police academies across the country, some as an example of what not to do, others as a call for reform. 6 months after that day at the airport, Diane stood in a very different room. The Pentagon Briefing Center was quiet except for the soft hum of climate control. She'd been promoted to major, a promotion she'd earned long before the incident, but that now carried extra weight. The ceremony had been small, professional, exactly what she wanted, but the real change wasn't in her rank. It was in what came after. The Army had assigned her to a new position developing training protocols for cultural awareness and bias reduction in military operations. It was a desk job technically, but Diane had learned that some battles were fought with policy and training, not bullets. She spent her days working with psychologists, civil rights experts, and military leaders to create comprehensive programs, real programs, not the checkbox exercises that most organizations use to claim they were addressing bias. The work was frustrating. Change came slowly in the military. Even when everyone agreed change was needed, some officers resisted, claiming the focus on racial issues was divisive or politically motivated. Others supported the mission but had no idea how to implement it effectively. But there were victories too. A new policy requiring detailed documentation before any use of force, updated training that included input from service members of color about their experiences, a review board with diverse membership to handle discrimination complaints, small steps but real ones. Outside the military, Diane had become something she never expected, an advocate. She'd established a foundation called Serve with Dignity that provided legal support and resources to veterans and service members facing discrimination. The funding came from her lawsuit settlement with the city, several $1 million that she immediately put to use helping others. The lawsuit itself had been settled quietly. The city admitted no wrongdoing, but agreed to pay substantial damages and implement sweeping reforms to airport security procedures. Diane could have pushed for more, could have taken it to trial and made them admit everything in court. But her lawyers convinced her that the reforms were more valuable than any public admission of guilt. Detective Bradley had faced federal civil rights charges. He'd pleaded guilty to deprivation of rights under color of law, a felony. He served 18 months in prison, lost his law enforcement certification, and would never work in policing again. Officer Chen had cooperated with investigators and received probation, but his career in law enforcement was also finished. Diane thought about them sometimes. Not with satisfaction exactly, but with a kind of grim understanding that actions have consequences. They'd made choices that day, choices that ruined their careers and changed her life forever. Everyone involved had been transformed by those few hours in the airport. The foundation kept Diane busy outside her Pentagon work. They'd already helped dozens of cases: service members denied promotions because of race, veterans facing discriminatory treatment at VA hospitals, active duty personnel dealing with harassment. Each case reminded Diane why this work mattered. One afternoon, a young Black Army specialist named Troy Jackson came to the Foundation's office. He was 24, third-generation military, and scared. His unit was recommending him for discharge under other than honorable conditions after he'd reported racist harassment by his commanding officer. The discharge would cost him his benefits, his GI Bill, his future. Diane spent 3 hours with him, hearing his story, reviewing his service record. Troy was a good soldier, excellent marks, clean record before this incident. The harassment claim was credible, well documented. The move to discharge him looked like retaliation. "Why should I even keep fighting?" Troy asked, exhausted. "Maybe I should just take the discharge and move on." "Because you earned your place in that uniform," Diane told him. "Because you served honorably, and you deserve to be treated with dignity. And because if you don't fight, the next person in your situation might not either. Someone has to stand up." She heard her own words echoed back from months ago. Someone has to stand up. Sometimes that was the only option. Not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. The Foundation took Troy's case. Within 2 months, with proper legal representation and media attention, the discharge recommendation was withdrawn. The commanding officer was quietly reassigned. Troy stayed in the Army, though he requested a transfer to a different unit. Another small victory. On the first anniversary of her arrest, Denver International Airport held a memorial dedication. They'd created a permanent installation in the terminal, a sculpture called "Dignity in Service," honoring all travelers who'd faced discrimination while also celebrating military service and civil rights progress. Diane was invited to speak at the unveiling. She almost declined. The last thing she wanted was to relive that day, to stand in the spot where she'd been handcuffed and humiliated. But General Hollis convinced her. "You need closure," the general said. "And more importantly, that airport needs to see you standing tall in the place where they tried to break you." So Diane went, wearing her dress uniform with her new major's oak leaves gleaming. Her mother came, as did her sister and several fellow soldiers. General Hollis stood beside her. The airport's new chief of police, a black woman named Aisha Williams, welcomed her warmly. Chief Williams had been brought in specifically to reform the department. She'd implemented everything Diane's case had called for and more. Comprehensive bias training, new stop and search protocols, a civilian oversight board, body cameras for all officers, regular community forums. The department was unrecognizable from what it had been a year ago. "Thank you for forcing us to look in the mirror," Chief Williams said privately before the ceremony. "I wish it hadn't happened the way it did. But the change that came from it, that's your legacy." The sculpture was beautiful. Abstract forms suggesting wings and uniforms, rising toward the sky. Bronze plaques around the base shared stories of discrimination and resilience, including Diane's. When it was her turn to speak, Diane stood at the podium looking out at the crowd. Media was there, of course, but also airport workers, travelers who'd seen the original video, veterans groups, civil rights organizations, and in the back she spotted a group of young black women in Army uniforms, watching her with expressions of pride and hope. "A year ago, I stood in this airport and experienced something that changed my life," Diane began. "I was arrested, handcuffed, and treated like a criminal despite having done nothing wrong. It was humiliating. It was painful. It was unjust." She paused, gathering her thoughts. But from that injustice came something unexpected, a conversation about race and policing that this country needed to have. Real reforms in how we train and monitor law enforcement, changes in military culture around discrimination, and a community of people committed to ensuring this never happens to anyone else. She looked directly at the young soldiers in the back. I want to tell those of you in uniform, and those thinking about serving, this is still a country worth defending. Yes, it's flawed. Yes, it has failed many of us over and over again. But the ideals we fight for, liberty, justice, equality, those are worth protecting. And part of protecting them is holding this nation accountable when it falls short. The applause was thunderous. This sculpture honors not just my experience, but everyone who's faced discrimination and refused to accept it. Everyone who stood up and demanded better. Everyone who turned their pain into purpose. She gestured to the bronze and steel rising behind her. We called it dignity and service because that's what we're all owed, service members and civilians alike. The dignity of being seen as human beings first, not stereotypes or threats or statistics. After the ceremony, people lined up to meet her, to shake her hand, to share their own stories. A middle-aged Latino man told her about being pulled over dozens of times for driving in the wrong neighborhood. A young Muslim woman shared her experience of additional screening every time she flew. An elderly black veteran talked about facing discrimination even while in uniform during the Vietnam War era. Diane listened to each one, really listened. These were the people she was fighting for. Not just herself, but everyone who'd ever been judged unfairly, treated unjustly, denied dignity because of who they were. As evening fell and the crowd dispersed, Diane stood alone for a moment in front of the sculpture. She thought about that day, about the fear and anger and helplessness she'd felt, about the long journey from that moment to this one. Her phone buzzed. A message from Troy Jackson, the young specialist the foundation had helped. He'd just received orders for his next assignment, a leadership position in a prestigious unit. His career was back on track. "Thank you for fighting for me," his message said. "You showed me it was possible." Diane smiled. That was the point, wasn't it? Not revenge or recognition, but showing people it was possible to fight injustice and win, possible to demand dignity and receive it, possible to change systems that seemed unchangeable. She'd never wanted to be a symbol or a spokesperson. She just wanted to serve her country and live her life. But sometimes life had other plans. Sometimes you became the person others needed you to be, not because you wanted to, but because you were in the right place at the right moment with the right combination of courage and circumstance. General Hollis walked up beside her, both of them looking at the sculpture. "You did good, Major. Not just today, but this whole year. You took something terrible and made it matter." "We made it matter," Diane corrected. "I couldn't have done this alone. Maybe not. But you had to be willing to stand in the spotlight, to relive your trauma over and over for the cameras, to let your pain become public property. That takes a special kind of strength." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. "What's next?" the general asked. "More work. Always more work. The foundation has a waiting list of cases. The Pentagon training program is expanding to all branches. There's talk of consulting with civilian police departments." Diane shook her head, laughing slightly. "I thought I'd be planning combat operations, not running a civil rights foundation and designing training programs." "You're still fighting," General Hollis said. "Just a different kind of war." "Yeah." Diane looked up at the sculpture one more time. A different kind of war. As she walked out of the airport that evening, past security checkpoints where officers now wore body cameras and worked under new protocols, past travelers who nodded at her with recognition and respect, Diane felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not because everything was fixed, it wasn't. Racial profiling still happened. Discrimination still existed. The work was far from over. But she'd taken her worst day and transformed it into meaningful change. She'd refused to be broken by injustice, and instead had become a voice for others facing the same battles. She'd served with dignity, demanded dignity, and helped create systems that protected dignity for those who came after her. That was worth fighting for. That was worth the pain, the exposure, the sacrifice. Outside, the Colorado sky was painted in shades of orange and purple as the sun set. Diane took a deep breath of cool evening air and smiled. Tomorrow there would be more work, more cases, more battles to fight. But tonight, she'd rest. She'd earned it. Major Diane Richardson, decorated veteran, survivor, and advocate, walked to her rental car with her head high and her heart lighter than it had been in months. The journey from that humiliating moment to this hard-won peace had been difficult and painful, but she'd made it, and in doing so she'd helped others make it too. That was the real victory, not what happened to the officers who wronged her, not the settlement money, not even the policy changes and reforms. The real victory was in showing people that you could face injustice and come through it stronger, that you could demand change and actually get it, that your voice mattered, your dignity mattered, your life mattered. One person couldn't fix everything, but one person standing up could start something that changed everything, and sometimes that was enough.